our prayers and our actions. Today we will remember the Mosul, Iraq. You have heard what's happening. We have become so numb to these news that we feel that whatever that is happening, I feel frustrated. There is some sense of celebration that this is happening, yes, but people who are paying for this are the innocent, the families, and like those mom and kids who had to flee the place, who had to, flee the persecution. So let's pray that this, conflict will end sooner than later, and that our leaders will find a way to live in peace. So we're going to light the candle. We started with Aleppo, Syria. Remembered Haiti, which is still recovering from flood. Remembered Yemen. And last week we remembered the people of Venezuela. And today we will keep the people in Mosul, Iraq, in our prayer. And if you know any place that we need to remember, please come visit here after worship. Leave the name of the region. Then we'll continue to remember and pray for them each Sunday. Also, I invite you to remember today, as Mike is doing this ministry, all those who are in recovery, that this day will be another day of sobriety and life, that they know that there are people who care, and we are accompanying them and walking this journey with them. So let us be in silence to remember all these prayers and prayers that are in your heart. And let's lift them up to God as we sing this song. announcement that I missed, and then let me introduce Jen. You may wonder what's in the altar. These are the two shawls that have been made to be sent to the people who need our support, our care, and our prayer. We have started the prayer shawl ministries. Whoever wants to, knitting and make a shawls. Actually, there's some yarns out there you can take on. Bring it here once a month. We'll gather whatever is made. We will bless them, and then send them and share them with people. For this week, we had 2. It will be sent to the longtime members who've been part of our church but now moved away. So one we're going to send to the Priscilla Grindell, who's been part of this church for a long, long time. The other one we're going to send it to Harold and Juliet, who also moved to Maine. So they're going to be the card, thinking of your card in the fellowship hall. You can sign their names, and then we'll mail them so that they cannot be here next Sunday, unless someone wants to go up in Maine and pick them up. But they'll be part of our church by this way. The one announcement that I didn't announce is that you'll hear more from Jen as a part of this team that was tasked to help our congregation to discern the future of our church. Today, we will have one of 2 meetings, all church meetings, around I think like 10 afternoon in the chapel, regarding whether our congregation wants to welcome all people, especially regardless of their sexual orientation and gender identity. These are the only area that our church's public statement doesn't include them as a fully welcomed people of God. And our church is engaging in that process to discern whether it is God's calling for us, church, to be publicly welcome all of them. So it's 12:10 at the chapel. We'll have listening sessions and question and answers. On Saturday, November 19th, a breakfast meeting will be held where we're going to sit around the smaller tables of small group and share our experiences, our thoughts, regardless of your position. All are valued, but we're going to have an opportunity to have a deep listening. And then we'll discern to the next step whether our church is ready to take the next step for this full inclusion. And let me introduce you, Jen.
Great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jen Myhawk, and I'm here to share a few words with you today on behalf of the Vision 2020 team that's been meeting for the past few months. So this team came into being, as I said, a few months ago at the request of Church Council to examine some big picture questions and conversations that are upon us here in Belmont and Watertown. So as you know, we're now like 3 years plus into this new life as a merged congregation, and some of that initial dust has settled. We've identified our new mission, vision, and values, part of which you can see on the side of the sanctuary here. We've renewed our commitments to spirit-filled worship, meaningful fellowship, social justice, and supporting recovery, core to who we are. And as we've begun to live into this new identity together, we're of course uncovering challenges and opportunities in doing so. And some of these are fairly commonplace challenges that all churches face, right? Growing and supporting our programs, having volunteers to teach Sunday school, for example, equipping leaders here in the local church, maintaining our buildings, and just being sure that we can respond adeptly to the world and community needs that we face. But there are some other challenges that are upon us as well, and in this also we are not alone, and that concerns some demographic and generational shifts that are happening. You might notice that people don't just come to church anymore because it's the thing to do. We also live in an area, or at least have found here in our congregation, that it's a fairly transient place. We've had so many people come and join, become members of this church, and then move on again in a few years, whether mostly career related. So personally, I find both of these dynamics to be very good news. We gather together not out of social obligation, but because we have found something here that is meaningful to us. And what's more, people who are here even for a short time are finding that with us and walking with us. So this is good news. But of course, that shift does present some challenges because who gathers and how, our current church structure, and this is not just local to us, of course, but as a denomination, we've relied on a different model. So we are finding in this, as maybe we're a little smaller than we were a few years ago, we do have trouble finding and sustaining supporting leaders. We also have these 2 sizable buildings to take care of. And we have these challenges that are not only financial, but also to our human and spiritual resources. But anyway, this year, this church together, not just our team, did something bold. We decided that let's actually have a frank conversation about this. So back in March, we had an all-church meeting where we got together and we shared our strengths and where we thought the future was going, and we all reaffirmed the mission and vision that I mentioned up front. But we really want to look carefully at how we are living into this in a way for the future, knowing that church just looks a little different today. So this Vision 2020 team was born, and I'll introduce them. I'll have all the committee members stand up at the end. But we started basically just getting together and sharing our lives. Why are we here in church in general, and why in this particular place? What does church mean to us? And what are we going to do about this shift that we are absolutely witnessing? And of course, we had plenty of wisdom around the table, but we wanted to look a little bit outside of ourselves, so we read 2 books together. Paul Nixon was the author of one called We Refused to Lead a Dying Church. And this book, and you're welcome to read these yourselves, but it was basically a collection of anecdotes of other churches that have been in similar places to ours, but honestly a little bit more severe situation than ours. And what they decided to do, and in some cases it was drastic. It was closing up shop and opening in a storefront, or just totally restructuring congregational leadership models to be a little more nimble and flexible. Or hiring a grant writer so that the mission projects in the community could be more sustainably funded. It is important to note that all of these drastic changes, while they re-energized and refocused the churches, didn't necessarily lead to drastic growth of Sunday morning attendance. So it's important to hear that the changes and different directions for the future are not necessarily going to mean swarms of people here worshiping with us on Sunday. And then we read a second book called Weird Church, where Paul Nixon and his co-author, Beth Ann Eastock, went one step further. Weird Church. So this was even more, this was basically throw it all away. We have to start totally from scratch. You might as well do a dinner church or found a community center, or let's move online. So some really new and drastic ways of thinking of church. So we found both of these books helpful, but don't worry. We don't think we're totally ready to be weird yet. We're not going to close everything down and go into the online model. Because also, I should mention, we're not, this team, Vision 2020, we are not directing this work. We are just coming with recommendations for your all consideration. So we found these books very helpful, but really, for us, we just want to try to discern what are the best ways for us to relate to people around us in this community. Because we're not looking for that silver bullet for church growth. So 4 things I'm going to talk about today that we've been discerning together. So first off, church for us, even now, even in this current moment, we know that we believe as Belmont-Watertown UMC that church is more than what happens here in the pews on Sunday morning. Most of us are all very aware, I would hope, and attuned to how important our Watertown site is in the lives of the community. Nearly 1,000 people pass through those doors every week in the recovery programs, and Mike is always ready to remind us that life-saving stuff is taking place there. And the meetings there have an impact on the people who attend, but I hope that you have also felt over these past few years, as I have, that it is shaping what happens here among us on Sunday mornings and throughout the week. But still, this current separation that we worship in Belmont and that this really vital ministry occurs in Watertown does pose some type of barrier to us understanding that church is actually more than what happens in the pews on Sunday morning. Sharing space together is a powerful thing. Think about how a relationship changes when you move in with a spouse or a family member or a housemate. It can be a challenge, for sure, but the rhythm of a shared life also enriches and blesses. Last week, Mike and we each shared together their core. They each picked one word as like an image for the church at present, and Mike's word was accompaniment. People accompanying each other through this life, and we talked about home. And as I was preparing these remarks, I thought, wow, it's really hard to accompany or be home with someone if you're not even having much shared space. So that is something that we don't have a specific recommendation around, but that we would like us all to start considering as we try to hone and shape our identity together as a church. Relatedly, we also, to seeing churches beyond the pews, it also is what's beyond our buildings. So even beyond what happens in our sanctuaries and basements, church also happens out in the community. There are plenty of people for whom Sunday morning worship is never going to be a place of connection. And we would like us to challenge ourselves vocationally to be present and active in other places in the community and see that as a part of who we are as a church. And I know that this is already being done in many ways. But again, the church of the future is probably going to look a little different than what we've seen. And that includes not always needing to bring things in-house here. And then as we mentioned, we also very quickly discerned as a group that this congregation really needs to have the conversation around welcoming people of all gender identities and sexual orientation. So the United Methodist Church, again this year in the spring at General Conference, upheld language that homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching, and that is something over which our church is deeply, deeply divided. And we know that churches in general and United Methodist congregations specifically are not seen as a safe space for LGBTQ people. So our committee members have really felt impassioned about bringing this conversation to us. And so we'll be helping support both the meeting today and the one on the 19th. So, and again, that's a conversation for discernment. Today we're just getting questions answered, and then on Saturday, the 19th, we'll share a little bit more about our own internal processing and discernment. But this really seemed like an urgent thing for us to have, to talk about as a church. And finally, the other thing we've been looking at is our building and operating expenses and all of that. And there's good and bad news here. The good news is that we are, as I mentioned, a lot better off than some of those other churches we've read about. For better or for worse, we've been in a situation, we kind of got a financial history of these congregations, and that when things came to the brink, lo and behold, a gift would come or a bequest would come. And we realized this is not a sustainable model for long-term ministry, but that has led to stabilizing us maybe more than some other places. So this is a good thing in that it gives us a little more room to experiment, and we're not on the brink at this moment. But we do have two large buildings that need a lot of work, and what we've found actually is it's not the financial concerns so much as the human concerns in doing this, that it is a huge strain on the people that are doing this work, and we need to really think about that and think about volunteers and staffing the upkeep of these buildings as we move into the future. And in the meantime, hug a trustee. So as you can tell, these are not final recommendations, but these are some of the key points that we've been discussing and discerning as a group. We need more clarity. That is yet to come. And again, this is going to come before church council, then before all of us at church conference in December to talk about. And in the meantime, we would love your discernment and feedback and questions so that we can talk about that as well. We meet every other Sunday after church, our committee. So, we're always in conversation about this. So at this point, I would like the committee members to please stand, and I will point them out and introduce them so that you all know you can pick your friends if you have questions and don't want to come to me. So would Vision 2020 please stand up? The real Slim Shady. Okay, so Bethany Cuyo here, Nan Decker, Sylvia Missel, Dan Bors, Terry Kohlenbrander, Neil Tujan, Annie Martin, and Cameron McBride. Yep, that's everyone. And we as ex officio member on the committee, of course, you can always speak with him. So the final thing I just want to say, I know sometimes change is hard and alarming, and it's really hard to stay grounded when we don't really know where this is all going. But a verse that's been on my mind, and actually my campus minister in college wrote this on the inside of my Bible, it's been a real guiding verse over the years, is Paul writing to the Thessalonians. So deeply do we care for you that we are determined to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also our own selves, because you have become very dear to us. And Thessalonians is the oldest book in the Bible. Paul's writing to this fledgling church that's kind of in a crisis point because people are dying, the second coming hasn't happened, and they're freaking out a little bit, to put it mildly. And I find it so fascinating that Paul writes, it's not only about the good news, it's not only about the word and the things that we believe together, it's about sharing lives together because we are dear to one another. And I really think that's what this work is about. It's about figuring out how we share our lives, the goodness that we found with the people in the communities around us. And that seems a little simpler, a little less complex, a little more inviting. And that's the calling to which we are more than capable of responding. So, thank you.
Our first reading today comes from Jeremiah chapter 29. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and settle down, plant gardens and eat what they produce, marry and have sons and daughters, find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there, do not decrease. Also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Yes, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Do not let the prophets and diviners among you deceive you. Do not listen to the dreams you encourage them to have. They are prophesying lies to you in my name. I have not sent them, declares the Lord. This is what the Lord says. When 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my good promise to bring you back to this place. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Our second reading comes from Revelation chapter 21. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. He who was seated at the throne said, I am making everything new. Then he said, Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. He said to me, It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give water without cost from the spring of the water of life. God is still speaking.
I don't know what I have shared with you, yes, probably so, but I always believe that there are two very different ways to live today. What are those ways? Today is either tomorrow of yesterday, right? You are in the tomorrow of yesterday, right? Or yesterday of tomorrow. And we sung our beginning hymn, There's a Spirit in the air. God in Christ has come to stay. Live tomorrow's life today. In today's Jeremiah lesson, this is a message to the people of Israel, the exiles, people who lost their nation, their promise, their faith, lost everything, taken into captivity in Babylon. And they're expecting an encouraging news from God, their God, how God will just bring them back, restore the glory, destroy the enemies. And the message that Jeremiah is saying is what? Promote the welfare of the city that you are exiled to. Pray for that city because your future depends on its welfare. That's a weird way of hearing the good news. That's the last thing that they wanted to hear from their own God. Build houses, plant gardens, grow families. in exile. Think about it. If you build houses in exile, it's not yours. Because you have to leave to go back to your, glory, right? Promised land, again, back to again. If you plant gardens, that's not going to be yours. Growing families, giving your daughters to marriage, Israelites' whole identity built upon maintaining their bloodlines. And God is saying, forget about those things. Grow the families. In exile, in captivity, in darkness, in hopelessness, in frustration. Do this. And doing this, living this in the midst of exile was against all their, belief, urges, and convictions. They wanted to hear, when can I go back? Tomorrow is too late. And God is saying, no, stay put. The exile is a place of forced limitedness, right? Exile is the place where tomorrow is no good, or no tomorrow is hopeful. Because whatever you do, it will be in that captivity. You will be removed from your dreams. Your life, your dream, your freedom, and your hope for future will be categorically limited and doomed. That's the life in exile. No tomorrow. And how does God bring hope and newness and tomorrow into this doomed exile and people in there? Jeremiah is saying, first, believe that God has a plan for you. Don't look at what you have now. Don't look at just your circumstances. Look at your God, and that God has a plan for you. That God is with you. That God is in your tomorrow. And that in that plan, God has something different than tomorrows of the exiles with no hope. And then God is saying, leave that different tomorrow that God has in mind right there, right then, in the place of exile. See, building houses, planting gardens, right? Growing families, that's what they wanted to do back in their homeland, right? Not in the exile. But God is saying, no, my plan is for you to build houses, plant gardens, grow families, not just back in your old days or future glory, but right there, no matter what's going on, in the midst of you. Leave my tomorrow today. Don't wait until some miraculous thing happens, that your perfect future comes in a package and all you have to do is open it. No, your future is already with you. God is already with you. Live it today. Don't give your eyes and faith into circumstances, but give your faith and eyes to God who is with you, who will be with you, and who has a plan for you. That's the message. See, our nation seems like to be in exile these days. Hope is not the first word that comes to our mind if we think about the tomorrow of our nation, isn't it? In this ninth inning of this election season, it's just can't imagine it. We are living in sort of like a forced limitedness. We feel like we would never truly overcome and stop the ever-widening, inequality that we see. We feel like it would never truly overcome the grifts of racism. We feel like nothing can stop what we are doing to the climate and to the environment. It just seems to be happening. We feel like there is no exit to move our people out of this just deadly and toxic divisiveness. What about our churches? Our churches in 21st century in America is exactly like in exile. All the forecast about the future of the church and religion, there's no theologians, no scholars projecting church will be glorious in 50 years. That people will be flocking in and worship God. That's not the the forecast that we have. This is a tough time to be a church, a pastor, a member, a faithful member, because test is big. It's like a swimming against the rip current. When we feel like we are in an exile, removed from the life we wanted, dreams we had, the future we hoped for, what we need to do is to see and believe in something totally different, new, in something very old and depressing. Just like the exiles in Babylon, they look around, everything was depressing. It's not their land, they are living it as second citizens. And God is saying, see the house there, see the garden there, see the new life there. If we want this nation to have a future with hope, as God said through Jeremiah, we need to begin to live tomorrow's unity today. If we are sick and tired of the divisiveness, and we cannot see the unity, but God has a plan. If we believe that this nation has a future of hope, we have to live tomorrow's unity today, tomorrow's civility today, tomorrow's understanding and acceptance today, tomorrow's equality today, tomorrow's justice today, if we believe God has a plan for this country and its people. If we want our church to have a future with hope, then we need to live tomorrow's faith today. No matter it may look absurd, difficult, and challenging, it may be. You heard those examples of congregations who made the necessary changes or had a different vision. They didn't go singing along into that. They went into it in spite it made them uncomfortable and difficult and challenging. Why? Because they believed in God and God's plan for them and God's tomorrow. That's what makes us as people of God. Yesterday, I was sitting with a wife who had to say goodbye, who had to literally let go of her life partner, her husband of 36 years, who was taking up all the life support. It was a tough place. It was a Babylon. It's a place of exile. And as he was slowly, relatively actually quickly moving into the next phase of his life in God, as he was dying, in the midst of death, the wife was calling her daughter, her family members, and saying in a present sentence, "He's in heaven. He's not here. He's in heaven with his son, his dad. He is not here," with tears. That's how we live tomorrow's life today. Christians, we are the people who are not waiting to die. We already have our own death in Jesus Christ. All we have to do is live into this new reality of resurrection. In God, there is eternity of God's hope and life. That's what eternal life means. We are the people who live resurrection now. As a church, as a community, and as a people. It's not an easy time to be a pastor. Let me tell you, there are many other times that I feel like, why the heck I got into this business? Because when my father was a pastor, church seemed great. 90% of all churches in America is declining, many of them dramatically. 600 churches in New England Conference, Methodist churches. 2/3 of them are not a full-time. We are losing about 10% of churches closing each year. We are lucky, we are blessed. There are pastors who have to wait to deposit their checks 2 weeks because it's hard to maintain. It's a real challenge. And the perception of the church in the society doesn't help. But if somebody asked me today, where Belmont-Watertown United Church be in 2020, 2025, 2050, I said, we will be living God's plan because we are already doing it now. And we are committed to doing that in the coming year. That whatever we discern as God's tomorrow, we'll live it now. And to that, thanks be to God. Let us stand and sing our closing hymn.
Oh
always be with you on this journey. So go and live tomorrow's life today, always. And now the blessing of God who created you, who redeemed you, and to whom tomorrow belongs, be with you forever and ever. Amen.